Summer Holidays in Rural School Number 2, located at the typical address for small Russian cities, Revolution Street, Building 12-inch, were considered a vacation only among those who, with age, had not lost either their romantic mood or their youthful imagination. The youth, the more responsible ones, did nothing but clean their parents' gardens of weeds, while the rest diligently avoided the unnecessary attention of their ancestors by hiding in gateways, forests, and abandoned places. That was the way of life. But alas, unlike traditions, even the old-timers did not remember a good harvest here. Working carelessly, the parents brought in little money, and the children did not care for the plants well. Slowly but surely, the city died out as something independent, degenerating into another dacha settlement. The middle of summer 2008 seemed no different from the year before, but its end was to be much more interesting. A 9th grade student with the name Grisha, familiar to these places, hit the reddish blot left over from the Colorado beetles collected during the day with a stone for the last time and stretched his back, not without pleasure. "Well, are you finished?" It came from behind him. Lisha, his older brother, once again smartly twirled the metal gas lighter, the envy of all the neighboring boys, and grinned slyly, squinting at the setting sun hitting his wide, ruddy and happy face. "I burned mine a long time ago." The young man did not object, although he knew that his brother collected only adult beetles, those that clicked merrily, exploding from the fire, and completely ignored the soft red gobies, which caused much more damage to the fleshy potato leaves. Not only remembering the hot temper of this tall even by the standards of other high school boys, he really wanted to know his secret. "Of course, you're older." "It's true," the brother agreed, smiled broadly, and once again, with a masterful feint, opened the lighter and struck a bright, bluish tongue of fire. Without moving, the flame soared upward with a furious hiss, reflecting in the wide-open eyes of Lisha, who, like Grisha, looked at him in fascination, as if at something otherworldly. The young man's heart beat excitedly before he decided to ask the question on which everything depended. "You'll tell me where you got so much gas and why it's like that. I'll help you with the field then." The lighter closed with a loud metallic crack, and the hissing of the fire immediately died down. Lisha looked solemnly at his brother, and his hand solemnly fell on his shoulder. "Get the bike," he said quietly, and not a word to anyone. Grisha looked warily at the barn located not far from the house. His mother was there, and he knew well what this meant. Lisha sighed. He knew it too, but he loved his little brother, and besides, he really wanted to show off. "Okay, I'm with you," he sighed. "The main thing is not to make any noise. You go upstairs. I'm downstairs. I'll see Dad and let you know." Stealthily, the boys moved towards the house, freezing at every rustle, despite the fact that they completed part of the work assigned to them. Getting caught by their parents actually meant getting a few more tasks, and they didn't want that. However, it would be good if only their father saw them. Their mother was the one who really bothered them. Despite the fact that Olga Pavlovna considered herself a sickly, practically dying woman, she nevertheless possessed inhuman, close to supernatural hearing and the ability to find herself in the most inopportune place at the most inopportune time. Sitting near the TV for days, listening to the church channel, she could nevertheless find herself near the window or at the stairs, catching her sons in an unseemly activity and immediately finding them work around the house or scolding them just like that, casually, and just when they were not ready for this. Dry, sickly, and incredibly noisy, that's how she was. Even her own husband was afraid of her, preferring to disappear for days at work, earning money for endless medicines, herbs, crosses, and icons, with which every shelf and every closet was lined in their rather large country house by local standards, located directly opposite the church, which, however, only fueled her religious zeal, resulting not only in hypochondria and endless sermons, but also in increasingly obvious outbursts of rage, which the brothers feared. The first stage of the operation, however, was successful. While Lisha guarded the door, Grisha carefully went upstairs and took the keys from the barn. However, going downstairs, he froze when he heard his mother's voice. Apparently, she, having heard something, came out of her room and was now standing in the middle of the corridor, blocking his path to retreat. Fortunately, she did not notice Grisha himself. "Do you think fire is a toy that suits you well, Alexei?" "I completely agree with this." Olga Pavlovna's thin, shrill voice echoed throughout the entire corridor, and Grisha was ready to swear that the sermon was clearly audible even in the neighboring area. She must have noticed the lighter in the young man's hands, and now there was no stopping her. "I'll tell you what, young man, Fire is a tool of the devil. What are you going to do with it? Cook? Or maybe he smokes, setting fire to the neighbor's cats? This is a much more likely answer to my question. The girls told me all sorts of things. Bird cats began to appear here and there in our area. It's all you, right? Damn Satanist. Standing at the top of the stairs, Grisha clearly saw how Alicia's powerful figure shrank in the frail shadow of her approaching mother. Her thin, pale face, made even thinner by her huge, ugly horn-rimmed glasses, seemed to consist of nothing but sharp angles. He couldn't see it, but he knew perfectly well what she looked like in them. Not dare bring fire the moi house, she said and waved her fist, which was clearly squeezing something. It was really a cross, a large cross, pointed at all ends, which her grandmother once gave her, covering himself with his forearm. Lisha repelled this attack with some difficulty. Pain showed on his face, but he didn't make a sound, too fascinated and too scared to say anything or defend himself in any other way. Get out of here and take your devilish toy with you, she shouted at him as he slowly backed away towards the exit. Realizing that he too should leave, Grisha hastily jumped up a window, thanking God for the summer heat, which forced his mother to leave him to plow, then carefully climbed down onto the ledge and from it down the carefully stacked woodpile. Lisha was already waiting for him at the barn, trying in vain to pretend that nothing had happened. Well, did you get it? He asked as if nothing had happened, although his ears were burning, and there was a long, albeit shallow cut on his forearm from which blood was still oozing. Certainly, the young man confirmed. The brothers spent some time in silence, preparing their bicycles for the long ride, checking the chains and saddles. She didn't like my lighter. Lisha suddenly exploded. She covered me with a cross. The old hag. I just took it out to twirl it. Suddenly he fell silent, and he spoke more quietly, as if, unlike his endless lighter, he suddenly began to run out of gas. But if fire really cleanses souls from sin and hell, how can he be anything bad? Grisha didn't know what to answer to this. Despite the formal title of the city, Rostov, which was the name of the city in which Lisha and Grisha lived, could be considered a large village that had grown from horizon to horizon. No houses higher than 5-story buildings, complete residential areas and vegetable gardens, sometimes found in the most unexpected places. It was also possible to leave the city limits completely unexpectedly. Just a few seconds and now, instead of courtyards, a completely dense forest began on both sides of the road, and a little later the road itself ended, giving way to some kind of dubious gravel embankment. Two brothers, one almost an adult, the second a little younger, headed north. According to my father, about 50 years ago there was no forest here yet. It was planted later on the site of collective farm fields, so the trees rarely grew uniformly. Among the aspens there was occasionally some alien oak, God knows how, brought in from a neighboring crop, but there were also separate areas of the real wild forest. We'll move here, Lisha said, and the brothers turned onto an inconspicuous path leading into a sparse birch grove. The bicycles plowed through the gravel with a crash. Grisha prepared to ride out onto the grass, slippery from the evening dew, but was surprised to feel something hard. Asphalt or what? He was surprised. Aviation plates, Lisha answered gloomily. They've put it in for 1,000 years, and they're still like new. We've arrived. The trees parted and a small clearing of several tens of meters, covered with smooth, seamless concrete, covered with a fine corrugated mesh filled with sand, was revealed to the brothers. Come after me. Grabbing his brother by the elbow, Lisha pulled him along, but Grisha already strongly doubted that he wanted to go there. His brother's obsession electrified the air, and the idea of an endless lighter no longer seemed like something worth such a risk. Mom talked about cats. Is it true? He asked. Lisha's grip weakened slightly and he peered in surprise at his brother's pale face. What are you doing? Crazy? The sincere surprise on his face slightly dispelled suspicions. Smiling at his own fears, Grisha nodded, admitting the mistake. Walking diagonally around the clearing, the brothers ducked into the nearby bushes and found themselves at a small concrete building with a rusted steel door. The side wall almost completely crumbled, revealing a rusty skeleton made of reinforcement and some rags. He's been shaking it for 5 years, Lisha boasted. Grisha did not object, looking with amazement at the remains of the old military warehouse during the disarmament era. In appearance, he suffered much more from time, corrosion and the fall of something heavy, for example a tree, lying suspiciously close to the gap, than from the efforts of his brother. But it was worth admitting that Lisha tried too. taking hold of a powerful-looking piece of reinforcement with both hands. He, with some difficulty, took it out of the concrete and laid it on the ground. The resulting passage was more than enough for himself, not to mention Grisha, who was not distinguished by a powerful physique. "Well, do you want to be first?" Flushing to the very roots of his red hair, Grisha shook his head sharply. The last thing he wanted to do in this life was crawl into a hole, having no idea what awaited him there. "Oh," Lisha sighed picturesquely. "Well, you probably don't need an endless ladder. You know what? Let's raise the stakes. If you climb in there now, then before your birthday, I'll give you mine until you get a new one. How do you like this offer?" Grisha's thoughts, already not distinguished by order, exploded into 1,000 small fireworks, simultaneously agreeing and refusing. He took the first step, followed by the second, bent down and, under the encouraging laughter of his brother, stuck his head into the hole, and then fell completely into it, having no idea what awaited him there. "I don't have a flashlight," he thought at first, but the floor seemed level and, probably, it was not such a problem. It seemed damp and cold inside, like a cellar. It must have been a cellar, only, of course, not for potatoes. The air smelled of something chemical, similar to kerosene, and something else sweet. "Come here. I've already earned the damn lighter," Grisha called, moving away from the gap, which now seemed like an unbearably bright white spot to give his brother space. And before he had time to come to his senses, the ground disappeared from under his feet and he fell down with a scream straight into what something liquid. Lisha arrived a few seconds later, pale and frightened, with a flashlight in his mouth. "Where are you going?" "We agreed to just go through the hole. There are holes in the floor all around." His flashlight illuminated a spacious concrete, metal-reinforced room filled with hundreds of boxes, some of which had been opened. Small gas cylinders were visible inside. Grisha fell into one of the 24 missing sections where the floor grate should have been located, but either due to an oversight, or for some other reason, it was not there, and he miraculously fell into a huge vat with the remains of fuel oil located on the floor below without breaking anything. "Well," Lyosha sighed picturesquely, "you won, so you want my lighter, right?" An evil light began to sparkle in his eyes. Taking it out of his pocket, he pressed the button and, turning it in his hand, showed his brother, who was standing ankle-deep in fuel oil, a bright blue flame. "Can you hold it?" Grisha backed away, but the flame had already gone out. Lisha only grinned mischievously. "You don't understand jokes, moron. Let's get out of here." "Well, that's my secret," Lisha said proudly. "I found it last year. Who knows when this warehouse was closed and why? I didn't really find any documents, but it's filled to the brim with flammable gas. I haven't even used 1,000th of it. Look." The balloon near the door was equipped with a bicycle hose with a needle at the end. Having inserted it into the filling port at the bottom of the lighter and pressing the piston, Lisha recharged it and defiantly shook the container. "I've been using it since that very year, and it's only half empty. By the way, if you breathe in this gas, it improves your mood. Do you want to try?" "Try it yourself," Grisha muttered, still not over his brother's last joke. Lisha smiled, disconnected the needle, pressed the hose to his mouth, slightly squeezing the valve, and took a deep breath. At first nothing happened, but then he fell on his side and started laughing. "What an idiotic look you have," he was stabbed. "If you could know." Grisha's first mistrust passed and he decided to repeat the procedure. The gas turned out to have a sweetish taste, but not quite the same as what they give at the dentist. This gas burned, causing blood to rush to the muscles. Evening drowsiness vanished as if by hand. Not knowing what to do with his strength, Grisha, like Lisha before him, fell on God, twisted by a powerful impulse, and really, what a stupid look his laughing brother had. Meanwhile, Lisha gradually calmed down. The laughter passed. He sat near the concrete wall, twirling his lighter in his hands and watching how the younger one was having fun under the influence of the gas. "The main thing is not to overdo it. I think you can get addicted to this thing. It's not for nothing that it was locked up here. However, I haven't really felt anything in a year, but still, and yet, remember, don't tell anyone about the place. It's ours and only ours." The balloon was still standing in the corner. Such a huge and attractive, incendiary balloon of fun. Grisha giggled again, imagining how he was burning from the inside. By the way, regarding the burning, unexpectedly, a drop of anger was added to the feeling of fun, but instead of dissolving into laughter, it flared up, reaching for the balloon. Grisha inhaled again. It only got worse. Lisha scared him pretty much. Well, let's see how scared he is. Look how I can, Grisha shouted to his brother and, still chuckling faintly, grabbed the lighter from his hands and slid down, right into the remains of the fuel oil. Lisha lazily followed him with his eyes and crawled to the edge of the hole, helping himself with a flashlight, which caused another burst of laughter. His fingers reminded Grisha of huge white spiders. "Shine on me," Grisha ordered, and performed several particularly impressive feints in his opinion, which he had managed to secretly train over the past weeks. When he secretly made his way into his brother's bedroom to play with her, the gas gradually evaporated and Lisha's eyes widened in horror. "Are you crazy?" he whispered, raising himself on his hands. "This is fuel oil. It can explode. You can die. I'll take off. And my shoes. That is. You. No. Just imagine how they will smoke." Bent over in a fit of laughter, Grisha could not hold the lighter, and it slid down at the same time as Lisha, who rushed to the rescue to the only person in the world to whom he was truly attached. In less than a second, having overcome 2 meters of height, the young man jerked Grisha up. His lighter, hitting the corner of the metal floor, opened, an automatic motor chirped, and a bright blue flame blazed from the nozzle. The young man closed his eyes. From childhood he clearly remembered that it was impossible to set fire to fuel oil with an ordinary match, but the gas in his lighter burned much hotter than ordinary sulfur. The floor under his feet burst into flames and the fire began to quickly climb up his clothes. The young man screamed, jumped up, tried to put out the fire, but in vain. Grisha gradually came to his senses, and already began to realize the horror of what was happening. The fire rose higher and higher. Seeing his brother thrashing about and screaming in pain, he tried to help him get out of the room, but Lisha no longer had enough coordination to squeeze into the narrow passage. Having torn off his t-shirt, Grisha wrapped one of his burning legs. When they managed to put out the second leg, Lisha had already lost consciousness. The skin on his legs was charred. With difficulty he lifted his brother onto his shoulders and dragged him towards the bicycles, not remembering himself with fear, still barely comprehending what was happening. With incredible difficulty he took him home, where he hoped to meet anyone who could help him, but he met only his mother. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Seeing her son, she rushed to him and helped Grisha put him on the ground. "Lord, what happened? Is this Satan? Did you call him? He got burned. He fell into the fuel oil." The woman rushed into the house. "Everything will be fine. You hear?" Grisha whispered, holding his brother's hand. "You will be cured. Seriously, even if you lose your legs. It's just legs. You should see what kind of prosthetics they make now. I saw it on TV. They can run faster than real people. You'll be like a robot." Lisha's hand twitched, closing forcefully on Grisha's wrist. His eyes flew open. "Damn, it hurts so much." His voice sounded more like a howl. "Be patient," Grisha begged him. "Mom will call an ambulance now." "Mother." "Found it." In tears, Olga Pavlovna ran out of the house, clutching an old, battered book in her trembling hands. This will certainly help. Running up to her wounded son, she opened it to a crumpled page and began a prayer in a rattling voice, but then lost her way and started over. Stupid. It wasn't the book he needed. Lost in anger, Grisha pushed his mother away and rushed into the house. Fortunately, Lisha lost consciousness again. "This is divine punishment," she whispered barely audibly. "Don't shout, Grigory. You'll wake up your father. Better pray with me. He needs help." I can't." But Grisha didn't hear anymore. Having gone into his father's room, sleeping after 2 daily shifts, the smell of fumes guaranteed the impossibility of waking him up even with a nuclear war. Grisha picked up the phone and dialed the desired number. Half an hour later, doctors took the unconscious brother away. Grisha was left alone. The next morning, the first thing he did was go to the hospital. His mother must have already been in church, at least she wasn't in the room. But Grisha didn't care anymore. Having made sure that neither she nor his father would go with him, he just went alone. The smiling nurse at the reception asked to give his last name, but when he said it, she became gloomy and asked him to wait. The doctor who came down was even gloomier. "Are you Alexei's brother? Can I talk to your mother? What about your father?" "She won't come. I went to pray. She's mentally ill." Finally he said what he had been afraid to admit for a long time. "And the father is too drunk." "How old are you?" "I'm 18, Grisha lied. The answer was too important to him. "What's wrong with my brother? Speak up." "I'm very sorry, son. He died last night. It was delivered too late." Stunned, Grisha sat down on the bench. It seemed to him that all this was not happening to him, but at the same time he knew that this dream would not end. All that remained was to check where it would lead him. Returning home, he saw subtle signs of Leisha's presence in this world. Here was a potato field, which together they cleared of Colorado potato beetles. Well, that is, how together he cleaned, and Leisha only chose healthy fat beetles to burn them with his brand new gas lighter. Smiling at this thought, he turned into his yard to the barn where their bicycles were stored, looked at his, and at the place where Leshin should have stood. Only he remained at the warehouse. Mother was standing nearby. He felt her gaze. Turning around, Grisha saw her in the window. She stood lost, but calm, as always. Her mood could change at any time, like the autumn wind. He died, Grisha said, avoiding looking towards his mother, but she heard. About? So he is now in a better world. So in heaven? Maybe. You poisoned him all his life and said that he was a Satanist, although this was not true. And now you say that he is in a better world and you can't even shed a tear? I loved my son and wanted to save him. It's not my fault that he played with fire. How dare you talk to me like that? You ungrateful puppy. The mother's scream resonated in the glass, causing them to vibrate, which instantly gave Grisha a headache. Staring with hatred at his mother, who was also looking at him, breathing heavily, he tried to sort out his feelings. But there was only one feeling: cold, burning hatred, the same color that burst out of the nozzle of Leisha's lighter. I painfully wanted to breathe in the gas to somehow brighten up this day. Snorting, Grisha got on his bike and rode out of the yard. Finally, Grisha noticed that in her hand she was holding the same pointed cross with which she had hit Leisha the day before. Did he play with fire? What's wrong with fire? Grisha muttered. The childish features, previously clearly visible on his face, sharpened. His gaze cooled. There was still smoke coming from the warehouse, but there was too little fuel oil for the fire to burn properly, and the cylinders were not damaged. Having tied the box with the first batch of cylinders to the bicycle rack using a cable found here, Grisha headed back, periodically taking deep puffs from the uncorked cylinder. It no longer caused laughter, but gave strength. Grisha did this route several dozen more times before he was satisfied with the result, filling the basement, outbuilding, barn and his room with boxes. The last stage of the plan had to be carried out at the last moment, so he could not risk leaving such a valuable reserve near an open fire. A few hours later, a strong explosion thundered from the direction of the forest, accompanied by the muffled pious howl of his mother, who went into another fit of prayer. The young man silently pulled off his sweat-soaked t-shirt and threw it into the far corner of his room. His father, who had difficulty opening his eyes after several days of drunkenness, did not greatly improve his mood by the fact that he got drunk again and was now singing something vaguely reminiscent of a hymn with his friends, and was sad in the yard. But soon this too was to end. The funeral was scheduled for the next morning. The night drowned in an endless rainy haze. The roads instantly washed away, as if God belatedly decided to stop Grisha from his plan. But it was too late. The church located across the street was not locked at night. Having finished, the tired and smeared young man put a sheet of cooking foil into the microwave, indicating the time at 9:30 a.m. on the timer. At 8 o'clock before leaving, he will open all his remaining gas cylinders and turn on the stove. We have all gathered here to see off the servant of God Alexei Efimovic on his last journey. Olga Pavlovna chuckled doubtfully, but, apparently out of respect for the priest, she refrained from further objections. Ashes to ashes, ground to ground. Now, you can say goodbye. The father, his face swollen from tears and alcohol, was the first to lean toward his son's pale forehead and, unable to stop himself, burst into tears. Grisha was second. He didn't cry. Goodbye, he said quietly. Mother was the third. Bending over, she didn't even touch him with her lips. She quickly walked back to her friends, who were standing nearby near the empty candle altar. Grisha gritted his teeth and approached them. The benches, covered with sheets, were moved closer to the walls during the funeral, and they provided excellent cover. Hey, Mom, he whispered. Remember when you said that the devil burns sinners with fire to cleanse them for their sins? Of course, son, Olga Pavlovna answered. That is why I believe that prayer could have helped much better than doctors if you had stayed then. But why are you so afraid of fire? Having struck a match, Grisha took out the last remaining cylinder from under his shirt and opened the valve. A dense stream of gas hissed menacingly and ignited. Swinging, he threw it past the retreating mother towards the exit, setting fire to the sheets hiding the boxes with the remaining cylinders. and a powerful explosion was heard. Meanwhile, the microwave timer in their home went off, exploding the house where Leisha and Grisha spent their childhood. It's you yourself are Satan. Oh, my poor child. I thought I could heal you, Olga screamed, trying to avoid the fire, which she somehow still managed to do, but the flames were already raging everywhere. Burning people rushed around the room, setting each other on fire. With a scream, my father threw himself straight through the stained glass window of the church and was now rolling on the burning grass, trying to extinguish the burning clothes. Several of my mother's friends were burning out in the corners. The priest was smoldering next to the blazing coffin. There is nothing bad about fire, Grisha stated calmly, and once again, as much as the smoke allowed, he took a deep breath. Another loud bang and increased fire announced that several more cylinders had burst. Grisha's head swam, but by force of will he forced himself to look at the woman he hated standing in front of him. He died because of you. Finally he said, I killed you all. I admit it. But you killed him. You and your stupid faith. Faith is never stupid. You stupid puppy. He just never believed. And you don't believe it. She squealed. I'll prove it to you. I believe. I'm not afraid anymore. Sharply turning on her heels, Olga stepped straight into the fire. He licked her feet softly. Less than a second passed. It seemed to Grisha that she would succeed. A crazy triumphant smile flashed on her face when she turned to him again, standing right in the fire. You see, the fire does not harm me. I do not burn, for I have no sins, which he could wash away as if she was saying. But at that moment, the smile gave way to a grimace of pain. Hair and clothes caught fire, and then Olga Pavlovna screamed. But her scream was lost against the background of another explosion, when all the remaining boxes detonated at the same time. But the supports of the church could not stand it, and the dome collapsed. When firefighters arrived, it was all over. However, when clearing the collapse, a badly burned but still alive 15-year-old teenager was discovered with symptoms of severe poisoning by a strange gas. Based on the case materials, investigators concluded that he was responsible for both incidents. But due to his young age and obvious incapacity, he will spend the rest of his life in a closed psychiatric hospital located near Rostov. Based on real events,